During our honeymoon, my mother-in-law shocked me by stealing my $25,000 diamond necklace. When we got home and I asked her about it, she got very angry. She slapped me hard and pushed me against the wall. To my surprise, my husband sided with her. Heartbroken, I left the house, thinking about how to get back at them. They had no idea what I was planning, and it would change everything. My name is Lisa. I'm a 30-year-old software developer from San Francisco. When I think back, I remember how excited I was on my wedding day. I felt so much love for James, my college sweetheart. We met at university, and we shared dreams about our future. I thought he was the perfect partner, but things didn't go as planned. Soon after we got married, I started noticing problems. The first signs were small, like a flat tire slowly getting worse. The cause? James's mom, Martha. Martha is in her mid-50s and raised James on her own. She was always very protective of him. I saw this when we were dating. She called him several times a day, asking where he was and what he thought about everything. I thought it was just part of their relationship, something I could get used to. After all, love means compromise, right? But after we married, her involvement in our lives grew more annoying. She started criticizing everything I did, from how I decorated the house to what I cooked. Once, she came over without warning and saw me trying a new recipe. "What are you cooking, Lisa? That looks awful," she said, like she was inspecting a failed experiment. "Just trying a new pasta dish, Martha," I answered, staying calm. "Isn't it too rich? You should stick to simple stuff," she replied. I felt embarrassed but tried to ignore it. I told myself she was just trying to help, even if it felt like she was putting me down. As time passed, her visits became more frequent and unwelcome. She would come over without calling and use a spare key I didn't even know she had. I'd walk in and find her rearranging the furniture like it was her home. "This will make the space flow better," she'd say, waving her hand. When I tried to speak up, things got tense, and James didn't seem to notice. Whenever I mentioned it to him, he would shrug it off, saying, "You know how my mom is, just be patient." It frustrated me. How could he not see how it was affecting me? I started feeling trapped, my love for him fading under the stress of his mother's constant interference. Then James suggested we go on a honeymoon to Hawaii to get away from everything. I was relieved. Finally, no Martha. But then, Martha insisted on coming with us. "James, I don't think that's a good idea," I said, worried. But for once, James stood up to her. "Mom, it's not a family trip, it's just Lisa and me," he said. I was amazed. This was the first time he had ever stood up to her, and it gave me hope. When we came back from the trip, everything seemed fine. James and I had reconnected, and I was excited to return home. But when I walked into our bedroom, I was shocked. The room was a mess, clothes everywhere, jewelry drawers broken, and my diamond necklace was gone. "James, come here," I shouted, panicked. "What's wrong?" he asked, running into the room. "I can't find my necklace. Look at this mess. What happened?" I pointed at the chaos. James looked pale as he saw the room. "I don't know. This is so strange," he said. I turned to him. "Do you think it could be?" "No, Lisa, I can't believe my mom would do this," he interrupted. I felt uneasy, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Martha was involved. I needed to find out. That night, I couldn't sleep, thinking about the mess and the missing necklace. How could Martha betray me like this? The woman I thought was just a little overbearing now seemed like a person to fear. The next day, I went to a few jewelry stores to search for my necklace. After hours of looking, I entered a small shop and froze. There it was, my diamond necklace, shining under the glass. "Excuse me," I said to the shopkeeper, "can I see that necklace?" When I held it, I knew I had to find out who sold it. "Can you show me the CCTV footage from when this necklace came in?" I asked, trying to stay calm. The shopkeeper agreed. I watched the footage, and my heart dropped. There, clearly on the screen, was Martha, my mother-in-law, handing over my necklace. A mix of anger and disbelief flooded me. I rushed home, ready to confront her, but when I got there, Martha was already waiting for me, arms crossed, with a smug smile on her face. "What are you doing here, Lisa? You look shocked," she sneered. "Don't play games with me, Martha. I know what you did," I snapped. Her smile faltered for a moment, and I felt a surge of confidence. I had proof. But I didn't expect what came next. I was about to confront the woman who had caused so much trouble in my life, and I had no idea how deep her betrayal went. Standing at the door, I took a deep breath. Martha's presence was heavy, and my anger was building like a volcano. "Lisa, why are you staring at me like that? If you've got something to say, just say it," Martha said, her tone full of mockery. "Enough with the games, Martha. I know you sold my diamond necklace," I shouted. "I saw you on the security footage." Her face instantly changed. The smugness was gone. replaced by anger. "How dare you accuse me of stealing?" she said, her voice rising. "You've always had a wild imagination." "I'm not imagining anything. You took something that doesn't belong to you, and it's time you admit it," I said, stepping closer, refusing to let her intimidate me this time. Martha glared at me and took a step closer, invading my space. "You think you can come into my house and accuse me? You're just jealous because I raised James by myself and he still cares about me. You'll never be as important as his mother," she hissed, her voice full of anger. "Being his wife doesn't mean I'm less important. You need to understand that I'm part of this family too. But you treat me like I'm just an inconvenience," I replied, my heart pounding. I had to stand up for myself this time. I wasn't going to back down. Just then, James walked in, holding a bag of groceries. When he saw us standing there, he dropped the bag and rushed over. "What's going on? Why do you two look like you're about to fight?" he asked. "Martha's been lying to me, James. I know she sold my necklace, and I'm done pretending everything is fine," I said, raising my voice. I turned to him, hoping for his support. "You need to believe me. I have proof." James looked between us, confusion on his face. "Mom, is this true?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "I didn't do anything. Lisa is just trying to start trouble because she can't handle that I'm still in your life," Martha said, throwing her hands up defensively. James looked at both of us, clearly torn. "I need to hear this from both of you. What exactly happened?" he asked, trying to calm things down. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I found the necklace in a pawn shop, James. I have the footage. Your mom sold it while we were on our honeymoon," I explained, the words tumbling out quickly. James turned to Martha, who was starting to sweat, her calm exterior cracking. "Is that true? Did you sell Lisa's necklace?" I borrowed it," she stammered, trying to cover up. "I thought it was just lying around. I didn't mean any harm." "Borrowed? You don't borrow something by selling it," I shouted, my frustration boiling over. "You stole it. You knew how much it meant to me." "Stop yelling," James shouted, his voice loud and firm. "This isn't helping. Mom, why would you do something like this?" "It was a mistake," Martha snapped, getting defensive. "I thought it was just some old jewelry, something no one cared about. I didn't know it was important to her." "Enough of your excuses," I exclaimed. "You've disrespected me from the start. I've tried to be patient, but this is too much." James stayed silent, and it felt like the world was holding its breath. I didn't know if he would defend me or side with her. "I can't believe this," James finally said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Mom, what you did is unacceptable. We need to figure out how to fix this." "Fix this? How can we fix this when she doesn't trust me anymore?" Martha replied, her voice full of anger. "I'm done always having to compromise," I said, pointing at Martha. "You need to make a choice, James." Martha's eyes narrowed with anger as she stepped back. "You think you can come into our family and make demands? You're nothing without my son," she snapped. Her words hurt, and I felt tears well up. "I am not nothing. I am his wife, and I deserve your respect," I replied. James looked between us, clearly torn. "I need time to think," he said quietly. "I can't deal with this right now." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with Martha. The air was thick with tension, and I felt hopeless, knowing things had reached their breaking point. "Your husband is weak, Lisa," Martha said with a sneer. "You'll never win this. I will always be his mother." I knew then that I couldn't stay in this toxic situation. I had to leave. I needed to take back my life, my identity, and my dignity. So, I turned and walked out, determined to seek justice for the betrayal I had faced. Leaving James and Martha in that moment was one of the hardest things I had ever done. It felt like walking away from my marriage, but I knew staying would only bring more pain. As I drove to my mother's house, a mix of fear and determination filled me. I couldn't let Martha's betrayal go unpunished. When I arrived, my mom was in the kitchen, humming while making dinner. The smell of her lasagna was comforting, but the weight of everything came rushing back as I told her what had happened. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry you're going through this," my mom said, her eyes full of concern. "You deserve better." "I need to do something about it, Mom. I can't let her get away with this," I said, my voice firm. "I'm going to report her to the police." My mom nodded, supporting me. "If that's what you think is best, we'll gather the evidence you need." That night, we went over the footage from the jewelry store and listed everything that had happened. I also wrote down the conversations I'd had with James, noting how dismissive he had been about his mother's behavior. I felt empowered, like I was taking control. The next day, I contacted the police and scheduled an appointment to report the theft. I felt nervous but also determined. I wasn't going to be the quiet wife anymore. I was ready to stand up for myself. When I arrived at the station, an officer greeted me and took me to a small room to talk. I showed him the footage of Martha selling the necklace and explained the whole situation. He listened carefully and nodded. "This is serious, Miss Miller. We'll need to investigate further, but we'll do everything we can to help you," he said reassuringly. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as I left the station. It was the first step toward justice, and I was ready to see it through. Over the next few days, the police worked hard on my case, gathering evidence and contacting pawn shops. They confirmed the sale of my necklace and even found more information about Martha's past actions. One afternoon, as I sat at my mom's kitchen table, my phone rang. It was the officer. "Miss Miller, we've gathered enough evidence to arrest your mother-in-law. Would you like to be there when we take her into custody?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment, but then I thought about all the hurt Martha had caused. "Yes, I want to be there," I said, my voice steady. The next day, I drove to the location where they would arrest Martha. My heart raced as I waited. I couldn't believe this was happening. My mother-in-law, the person who was supposed to support me, was about to face the consequences of her actions. When the police arrived, they approached Martha as she was leaving her house. The usual arrogance in her posture faded away. I stood at a distance, my heart pounding in my chest. "Martha Ellen, you are under arrest for theft," the officer announced. A wave of triumph rushed through me. This was justice. As they handcuffed her and led her away, I couldn't look away. I watched as her world crumbled. I realized, then, that I was free from the chains that had once bound me. In that moment, I felt empowered. I was no longer a victim, I was a survivor, ready to reclaim my life. The day Martha was arrested marked a turning point. I had confronted her and taken control of my own story. After the police took her away, a strange mix of emotions washed over me: relief, sadness, and a sense of empowerment. I knew I'd made the right decision, but the reality of what had happened still weighed heavily on my heart. In the days that followed, I was caught in a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Martha faced theft charges, and I learned that she'd likely face serious consequences for her actions. Though I felt closure beginning to take shape, I also had to face the reality that my marriage with James was hanging by a thread. James reached out several times, desperate to talk. I was hesitant, but I knew we had to address everything. One evening, we met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. As I walked in, a mix of hope and dread settled in my chest. Could we salvage our relationship, or had too much damage been done? "Lisa, I'm so glad you agreed to meet," James said, his voice shaky as he sat across from me. "I've been worried sick about you." "I've been worried about you too, James," I replied, my tone neutral. "But we need to talk about everything that's happened. You need to understand how hurtful your mother's actions were, and how your lack of support affected me." He nodded, his gaze dropping to his coffee. "I know, I can't believe she'd do something like that. I should have stood up for you sooner. I'm sorry." "Sorry isn't enough, James," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Your mother has caused irreparable harm. I've lost trust in both of you. You need to decide whose side you're on." "I'm on your side, Lisa. I love you," he pleaded, desperation in his voice. "Then you need to prove it," I replied, trying to stay composed. "I can't stay in a marriage where I feel like a second-class citizen. You need to choose between me and her." We talked for hours, but it was clear that the rift between us was too deep. Though he expressed his love, I couldn't shake the feeling that his loyalty to his mother would always come first. As we parted that evening, I knew what I had to do. The following week, I filed for divorce. It was painful, but I felt lighter, like I was finally shedding a burden I had carried for too long. Martha's court date was scheduled a few weeks later. The day arrived, and I walked into the courtroom, anxiety and anticipation mixing in my chest. I wanted to see justice served and show Martha that her actions had consequences. When she entered the courtroom, she looked older, more haggard than I had ever seen her. It was a stark reminder of how far things had fallen. The proceedings were quick, the evidence was clear, and it didn't take long for the judge to hand down the verdict. Martha was sentenced to community service and ordered to pay restitution for the necklace, along with additional fines totaling $25,000. As the gavel struck, I felt a rush of vindication. This was justice, and I had reclaimed my life. With the divorce finalized shortly afterward and Martha's fate sealed, I embraced my newfound freedom. I focused on my career, throwing myself into projects that inspired me. I took up new hobbies, explored the city, and spent more time with my mother, who had been my rock throughout this entire journey. In the months that followed, I learned to cherish my independence. I discovered my strength in solitude and began rebuilding my life on my own terms. I reflected on the lessons I had learned about trust, respect, and the importance of standing up for myself. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, sipping wine and watching the sunset over the city skyline, I felt a sense of peace. I was no longer bound by the toxicity of my past. I had turned the page and was ready to embrace a new chapter full of hope and possibility. I had faced betrayal, fought for justice, and now, I was finally free.